It's one of the oldest, most powerful stories humanity has ever told. A great flood that just wiped the world clean. So today, we're going to dig into the evidence behind this epic myth, from ancient tablets and dusty archaeological digs, all the way to the geological scars on the planet itself.
Just let that sink in for a second. Over 200 cultures on every single continent. This isn't just a story from one book or one tradition. It feels more like a shared global memory. And that forces you to ask a really big question. What could have possibly happened that left such a deep, permanent mark on pretty much everyone?
All right, let's frame this investigation with 3 key facts right off the bat. First, the oldest written version of this story we've ever found is way, way older than the story of Noah. Second, modern science actually confirms that, yeah, civilization-altering floods definitely happened. And third, one of the most compelling ideas points not to a sudden apocalypse, but to the slow, heartbreaking drowning of a homeland that took thousands of years.
So our search has to begin with the very first time somebody wrote this story down. Let's look at the textual evidence.
Picture it. It's 1872. You're in the British Museum. An expert named George Smith is hunched over this ancient clay tablet trying to decipher these tiny wedge-shaped marks, and all of a sudden, his jaw hits the floor. He realizes he's reading a story that sounds almost exactly like Noah and the Ark, but this tablet is from ancient Mesopotamia. It was an absolutely mind-blowing discovery that sent the origin of the flood myth rocketing back in time.
And we're not talking about some vague resemblance here. The parallels are just shockingly specific. The Mesopotamian hero, a guy named Utnapishtim, he's told to build a boat, he saves his family and animals, the boat lands on a mountain. He even sends out birds to see if the water has gone down. I mean, the details are so precise, it forces you to wonder,
What's going on here? Is this just a case of one culture borrowing a story from another? Or maybe, are both of these stories tapping into an even older story, one that was just passed down by word of mouth for centuries? Or, and this is the one that really gets you thinking, could these be 2 separate eyewitness accounts of the exact same world-changing event? To even begin to answer that, we've got to leave the text behind and get our hands dirty.
right, because if a flood that big really happened, it must have left some kind of physical scar on the landscape. This brings us to the archaeological evidence.
We're heading to southern Iraq, to the incredible ruins of the ancient city of Ur. Back in the 1920s, a famous archaeologist, Sir Leonard Woolley, was digging here. And he wasn't just digging for treasure. He was specifically looking for hard proof of the great flood he'd read about in those Mesopotamian texts.
So in 1928, his team is digging this massive pit, going deeper and deeper, and then suddenly, they hit it. A layer of pure, clean silt laid down by water that was 3 meters, about 10 feet thick. There was an older settlement buried underneath it, and then Sumerian civilization just picked right back up on top of it. Woolley brought his wife, Catherine, over, and the story goes she just looked at it and said, well, of course, it's the flood. It really seemed like they'd found the smoking gun.
But science is rarely that simple, right? Modern analysis has shown that what Woolley found was, without a doubt, evidence of a huge catastrophic flood. But it was a river flood, probably the Tigris and Euphrates rivers overflowing in a massive way. For the people living in Ur, it would have felt like the end of the world. But a global deluge that covered the mountains? No, this was a regional disaster.
So, if we want to find proof of a flood on that mythic scale, we need to think bigger. We have to zoom out and look at the geological record for the scars on the Earth itself.
Okay, so in the world of geology, there are 2 main theories that have been put forward as the possible origin of the flood myth. One is a super-fast, violent flooding of the Black Sea. The other is a much slower but just as world-changing drowning of what is now the Persian Gulf.
Now this might look complicated, but the basic idea is pretty simple. On the left, you've got the flood hypothesis. The theory here is that about 7,500 years ago, the Mediterranean Sea burst through a natural dam and just cascaded into the Black Sea basin, which was a much smaller freshwater lake at the time. A total catastrophe. On the right, though, is the competing idea, the outflow hypothesis, which paints a much calmer, more gradual picture. And you know, after years of debate, the scientific consensus has really shifted. The evidence now points pretty strongly to the outflow hypothesis. Scientists have looked at sediment cores, they found ancient river deltas, and it all shows a steady stream of water flowing out of the Black Sea for the last 10,000 years. There's just no geological evidence for that massive, catastrophic inflow that the other theory needs.
So that brings us to the second theory, and this one paints a totally different kind of picture.
This isn't about one bad week. See, at the end of the last ice age, the glaciers melted and sea levels rose all over the world. And the area that is now the Persian Gulf, well, it used to be a huge, fertile river valley, probably packed with early human settlements. And over thousands of years, the ocean just slowly crept in and drowned that entire world.
So what if the Great Flood story isn't the memory of a sudden, violent storm? What if it's the collective trauma passed down over generations of watching your entire world, your homeland, slowly vanish under the water? It would have been this slow-motion catastrophe that created waves of refugees and a powerful, lasting story of a paradise lost to the sea.
And this brings us right back to where we started. That Persian Gulf idea is a pretty compelling explanation for the Mesopotamian story, for sure. But what about the other 200 cultures around the globe that have a flood myth? I mean, when you look across all these different cultures, the theme is just everywhere, even if the local details change. In Mesopotamia, the gods are annoyed by how noisy people are. In China, a hero named Yu the Great has to tame a natural disaster. Each culture puts its own spin on it, but the core story, water destroying the world, that part is remarkably consistent.
So this leaves us with two big theories to explain why. You've got the shared origin theory, which suggests one core story, maybe born from that Persian Gulf event, was so powerful that it traveled with people as they migrated all over the planet. Then you have the independent catastrophe theory, which argues for something much simpler. Devastating floods are a universal human experience. If you live near water, sooner or later, your people are going to experience a terrible flood, and you're going to create a powerful story to make sense of it.
So after looking at the text, the archaeology, the geology, we're not left with one clean answer. Instead, we're left with a set of much deeper and honestly more interesting questions.
First, what was the original spark? Was it one huge event like the drowning of the Persian Gulf that started it all? Or is the myth more like a composite memory, a blend of hundreds of smaller disasters? Second, how did the story travel? Did one tale literally get carried from person to person across the globe? Or does the sheer trauma of a flood just naturally make us create the same kinds of stories everywhere? And finally, what's the story really about? Is it history, a religious warning, or is it a timeless metaphor for survival and starting over?
You know, the evidence strongly suggests there's a real event, or more likely a whole series of real, terrifying events at the heart of this myth. But its true power is how it can be both a memory of a world that was lost and a story about survival that still resonates today. The line between what happened and what it means has been completely blurred by time. So, what do you think?